What is at this site?
Here at this site, we have the tomb of Moses.
There's a tomb here.
Yeah.
Of Moses.
Yes.
Can we see it?
Yeah.
The tomb of Moses has remained shrouded in mystery for over a millennium. While many claims of finding the tomb have not been proven, it remains a fascinating topic to think about.
The text is a bit vague. It mentions a mountaintop and then it mentions a valley, and it concludes with the statement that the tomb location is really just unknown.
It stems from the slightly varying Judeo-Christian and Islamic accounts of the life and death of Moses, and, most notably, what happened right after. While the absence of the tomb makes archaeological insight near impossible,
this is also supporting the possibility that it was built and leveled by someone.
there are still some findings pointing towards the most probable location of his tomb, and they can be examined today. What are these findings? What has Jesus warned about concerning this? Join us as we uncover the most possible location and content of the tomb of Moses. The location of Moses' tomb. Anyone familiar with Jewish, Christian, or Islamic traditions should be familiar with the person and character of Moses. Known to be one of the greatest heroes of the three biggest monotheistic religions, the person and character of Moses have no doubt shaped human culture and religion for thousands of years. But while traditions from all three religions agree on a lot of the details surrounding this intriguing figure, one of them differs significantly on the topic of his death and burial. The Hebrew scriptures tell us that Moses died in the land of Moab, buried in a valley opposite of Beth Peor.
Here we have the tomb.
The tomb of Moses.
Yes, here. Up, please.
However, nobody knows the exact location where he was buried. Due to the sacredness of these writings, Christians and Jews agree that it is true. The same thing goes with the Quran. Both sacred texts acknowledge that the exact location of his burial remains a mystery.
Before crossing over the Jordan River, will be buried somewhere on Mount Nebo. The Bible says that it doesn't know its exact location, and Joshua will take over.
However, sacred religious traditions have given more specific information on where Moses' tomb might have been located. To give a reliable answer to the question of where the tomb of Moses is and what could have been found there, we will need to examine the life of the prophet as portrayed in the sacred texts, most notably the Hebrew scriptures. We will attempt to reconcile the data from the religious texts with all related archaeological discoveries and studies on the subject. Then we will use the results to arrive at our conclusions. So without further ado, let us investigate scriptural and religious traditions. Understanding the background and upbringing of Moses is hugely significant to determining where he was buried. Though historians have debated his exact year of birth, the broad consensus among scholars places the event somewhere between the 13th to 15th centuries before the birth of Christ. When placing the biblical story of Moses alongside the most historical accounts of Egyptian history, we can place the birth of Moses during the reign of Seti I, who reigned as king of Egypt from 1290 to 1259 BC. The Hebrew scriptures portray Seti I as the cruel king who enslaved the Israelites, making them do hard work because he was afraid they would grow powerful enough to take the whole country for themselves.
The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of the slavery went up to God.
Egypt was a prosperous land at the time, and it was thanks to the rulership of a Jewish prime minister who saved the land from famine 300 years prior. This man was known to many as Joseph, the son of Israel. But this king never knew much about him and never cared. For many years, the king made the Israelites do hard work, but it did nothing to quell his fears about the future of his nation. The population of the Israelites grew at an alarming rate, and he resorted to taking the lives of the male children of each family.
Pharaoh had all the slaves' male infants killed. He had a dream that one of them would lead a rebellion against the throne.
Moses, a male child, was born during that time, and his mother hid him until she could no longer do so. Out of desperation, she put him in a basket with currents glowing towards the king's palace.
I won't let them take him!
The basket! I'll hide him in the reeds by the river.
If they catch you, they'll kill us all.
And it carried the vessel to where the king's daughter found it. There, she gave him his name and took him as her son.
Are you mad? This is a slave child.
I don't care. I was meant to find him. But really, I didn't find him. He found me.
You cannot let him live.
The young Moses grew up in the palace, becoming one of the de facto princes of Egypt. He knew he was not an Egyptian by birth, and this was most evident when Moses killed an Egyptian he found beating up an Israelite. Such a crime warranted capital punishment, as far as he was concerned. So he fled to a town in the desert called Midian. There he met the love of his life, Zipporah. They both got married and had 2 sons. Before then, Moses took a job offer from his father-in-law to work as a shepherd, and through this work, he was able to look after his family. It was when he was at his job one day that he had an extraordinary experience with the God of the Hebrews, commanding him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt into a better place where they could live as free people. After a long discussion with the divine, he returned to Egypt and confronted the king with demands to let the Israelites go in peace. The king's refusal led to 10 catastrophic national events known as the 10 Plagues. The last of these plagues caused the death of his son, and the ensuing grief made the king give up and promise to let the Israelites leave peacefully. The Israelites had begun leaving the region peacefully, but the king, now full of rage and spite, changed his mind and chased the Israelites with a massive army to the shores of the Red Sea. According to the text, the God of the Israelites parted the Red Sea, making it possible for them to pass on dry ground to the other side. After a brief setback along the way, the king chased the Israelites, but by the time they had gotten to the other side, the water closed on the king and his army. The king and his entire army drowned in the deep water, and the bodies were found at the other shores later on by the Israelites. Moses had now successfully led his people out of slavery, but his work was far from over. Moses led his people forward to Mount Sinai, where he received the special laws commonly known as the 10 Commandments, which the Israelites promised to obey. But they broke their promise just 40 days after and got punished for it. Not long after, they moved forward, eventually building a portable temple where they would carry out their religious activities. Moses faced multiple setbacks while leading his poll through the desert of Paran. Among these major setbacks were multiple rebellions and protests, periods of apparent drought, and supernatural incidences of divine punishment. One of the protests was led by his sister Miriam, with the others led by subsequent rebels who found life in the desert unbearable compared to slavery in Egypt. As Moses grew older, he chose a young man named Joshua to lead the people when he was gone. Jewish tradition has it that shortly after he had written most of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Moses went to meet God at a high mountain. Up there, he was shown the promised land where the Israelites would live forever as free people. At that mountain, according to the scriptures, God peacefully took his life and buried his body in an undisclosed location in the land of Moab. But this is where this story gets interesting. Nobody knew about this event until it was found later on in his writings, which indicates that the prophet most likely wrote about it while foreseeing his death shortly after. Besides having the ability to tell the future, Moses had the strength of a young man even when he was well past 100 years old, with sharp eyesight and memory still vibrant enough to recall ancient passed-down traditions and events from which he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. Christian tradition has it that Moses was buried on or around Mount Nebo, located in the ancient region of Moab in present-day Jordan. This gives us more specific details on what the Hebrew scriptures say about his place of death, and the strong roots of religious tradition had made it a hot spot for devout pilgrimage. How true is this tradition? Has there been any valid archaeological find at the site? Please keep watching for answers, and much more. The Moses Memorial at Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo is part of a mountainous area called the Abarim Range. It gives a wide and beautiful view of the Jordan River Valley, the Dead Sea, and the city of Jerusalem. it has become a hotspot for tourism, respected as a place of great historical and religious importance. The highest point of this mountain is a place called Siaga, believed to be the exact spot where God took him away. Because of this, a special stone was set on that place with descriptions marking the areas as sacred. On the site was built a church and a monastery, both built by early Christians as an act of respect for the late prophet. The earliest church at the site was built by Egyptian monks in the 4th century. As time progressed, the little church was well expanded into a basilica and monastery. However, remnants of the old structures are still found at the memorial site, with significant ancient mosaics found therein. These mosaics were very important because they were excellent samples of art from the Byzantine era, a continuation of the Roman Empire during late antiquity and the start of the Middle Ages. Known for their intricate and detailed designs depicting beautiful plants and animals with scenes from daily life and stories from the scriptures. For certain reasons, the site was abandoned for a long time, but would later be rediscovered and studied by modern methods. The modern exploration of Mount Nebo started in 1863 with a short visit from Félicien de Saulcy, believed to be the first to record the sacred name of the place. In 1933, a group of religious people took custody of the site. These people, known as the Franciscans, conducted extensive archaeological work and took on the task of maintaining the memorial. They were the ones who expanded the old small building into a large basilica, putting in the beautiful mosaics and artifacts that impressed worshippers and visitors from around the world, even to this day. Although it seems most scriptural and archaeological evidence points toward Mount Nebo as the site where Moses was buried, 2 other places stand as reasonable contenders. One of these other possible locations is Mount Pisgah, a place that is often used interchangeably in the scriptures with Mount Nebo. This further makes the location less precise, as it presents a much broader region where the grave can be found. Wadi Musa, a site located near a region called Petra, located in Jordan, stands as the final contender. However, it is less widely accepted thanks to a lack of archaeological evidence when compared with Mount Nebo. However, these 3 places can be reconciled to a reasonable extent. First of all, they all symbolize the various aspects of Moses' life and legacy. In this light, Mount Nebo shows the end of his journey from Egypt, while Wadi Musa reflects local traditions that point towards the historicity of Moses. Secondly, Mount Nebo and Mount Pisgah were most likely used interchangeably because they referred to a much larger region, covering multiple peaks and valleys. Thirdly, it is important to note that different traditions have brought up different sites for bonding with local communities through their desire to be a part of sacred history. Multiple archaeological and historical research have gone into this, one of which was a written project put together by renowned scholar Jerome Murphy O'Connor. It provided detailed information on Mount Nebo and how important it was in recorded secular history. Another research was carried out by the Studium Biblicum Franciscanum, which had conducted several extensive excavations at Mount Nebo. We also have modern documentation with resources from the Custeria Terra Sanctae, each showing details on the work and historical development of the sacred memorial. All these sources tell us that Mount Nebo is the most probable location for the burial site of Moses. The problem is that past efforts were made to find this tomb in the region, but to no avail. How and when did this happen? Let us find out together. The Midrash of Sifrei, an ancient Jewish commentary dated to the 3rd century AD, tells of how the Roman emperor at that time wanted to find the body of Moses by all means. According to the record, it seemed like he was buried in multiple places at the same time. The 2 army units sent out by the emperor allegedly found the spot where he was buried, and their discovery was astonishing. As the ancient commentary put it, when they went below, they would find it above, and when they would return above, they would find it below. So they split up, with half of them staying above and the other half below. But then the ones above only saw it when they looked down, and the ones below only saw it when they looked up. For this reason, The text tells us, nobody knows for sure where his burial place is. This reflects the long-held tradition upheld by the scriptures that the place where Moses was buried is unknown. The ancient commentary, called a midrash, tries to make it look like it is supernaturally dispersed at multiple locations. However, one might choose to interpret this. It is empirically obvious from known history and archaeology that nobody knows where Moses was buried. The scriptures are also quite clear about it and stand independently of all other traditions and oftentimes against them. But perhaps what boggles the minds of those who believe the scriptures is how Moses died at a time when the Israelite camp was in a valley near Beth Peor, a place that is very limited in size, yet his burial location remains unknown even today. This fact is quite surprising, and the mystery to some only goes to show that the death of Moses and his burial was a truly miraculous event. This is further proven by the few scriptures written over 1,000 years after the death of Moses. They talk about what happened to his body after his death and his current state in another place. Perhaps they might tell us why the burial site has not been found and why we might want to stop trying to find it. What do these scriptures say? Well, this is where things get even more interesting. Moses in the New Testament. About 1,300 years after the death of Moses, a Jewish carpenter named Jesus had been making waves among the Israelites. With alleged stories of how he healed sick people, multiplied food, and raised people from death, he had grown popular among the masses. With a charismatic yet humble personality, Jesus of Nazareth was no doubt a sensation for many of those living in first-century Judea. One afternoon, he led a few of his followers to a high mountain where he was seen having a long discussion with two prominent prophets from the previous millennium, and one of them was none other than Moses. This was shocking to the followers of Jesus, as they never thought Moses was alive in any form. After Moses and the other prophets left, Jesus warned his few followers not to tell anyone about it in the meantime. About 20 years after the death of Jesus, Jude, one of the carpenter's brothers, wrote a letter to the churches existing at the time. And you won't believe what he wrote about Moses. He said that after the body of Moses was buried, two angels were arguing about who would have custody over the body of Moses. One of them was Michael, the archangel, and the other was Lucifer, known to many as Satan. It makes no mention of what happened afterwards, but it strongly implies that the God of Israel took Moses' body away after taking his life. Though the text says he was buried by God, scholars have noted that it could have been a metaphor, implying that God properly took care of all the expected rites following Moses' death. This was likely done so the Israelites wouldn't bother themselves with finding his body so they could give him a proper burial. If this is true, then it changes everything. It shows why finding the body has eluded people for centuries.
Do we know who's inside this?
This was Moses' tomb, is relying on Muslim traditions, and they pointed on this place.
Why so? Because in the simplest terms, the reason nobody knows where is because God took him away. His appearance before Jesus in the Holy Mountain shows that he was eventually restored to life by God sometime between his death and the arrival of Christ. However, he no longer lived on earth as a man, but served the God of Israel in a much different place. Despite this, some believe the body has been found at the mount, but has been kept hidden to maintain sanctity. But none of the given proofs can substantiate this claim. It is also helpful to note that Christ himself warned against seeking dead people as a means of finding supernatural signs. But now that we have a great understanding of Moses' death and burial as portrayed in the Hebrew scriptures, what does the Islamic tradition say about it? Let's find out. Islamic traditions on Moses' death and burial. The character of Moses, known to the Muslims as Musa, has multiple traditions in Islam that narrate the events following his death. Abu Huraira, a companion of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, tells of how the angel of death sent to Moses was greeted with a slap to the eye by the prophet. The angel returned to heaven and told Allah that he was sent to someone who didn't want to die. Allah sent back the angel to instruct Moses on what he could do to live much longer. After the angel had returned with the instructions, Moses asked what would happen after the promised years were exhausted. Allah replied that he would die, and Moses begged to die at that moment. But it was on the merciful condition of taking his life close to the sacred land, where he would catch a good glimpse of it before he passed away. Abu Huraira added that if he were there, he would gladly show the reader the grave below the red sand hill on the side of the road. This gives a specific yet vague location and roughly represents the first tradition. Another tradition, however, is the exact opposite. This considers the location as unknown despite a local Muslim. Tradition placing the tomb of Moses at the Muslim shrine of Nabi Musa. The origin of this tradition is unknown, and the primary routes used by Arabs to make pilgrimages to Mecca included the road leading from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is important because the exact location of the shrine looks like what would have marked the end of the first day's journey in that direction. Studies imply that it was at first a point of rest for pilgrims, serving as a great place for looking across the Jordan Valley and getting a good glimpse of the beauty of Mount Nebo. Many pilgrims loved to worship from this spot, and that was how the culture of worshiping in the area had begun. Slowly over time, the place became sacred. A probable time of building the shrine could have been in the 13th century, precisely in 1269, when Mamluk Sultan Baybars visited the site since he set about building an extensive shrine during that period. Renowned scholar Murphy O'Connor believes that the site that was previously a point for admiring the real location of Moses's distant grave site had over time become confused with the tomb itself. Another scholar, Uri M. Kupferschmidt, says the shrine became a fixed point that greatly affected ancient traditions. One tradition holds that the spot where the shrine is was shown to Saladin, an important Muslim ruler, and it prompted him to build a mosque in the area. This was later expanded by Baybars. This claim is further supported by Arab geographer Mujir al-Din, who wrote about it in the late 15th century. He said that the tradition has a low chance of being authentic and stands as one of many sites claiming the same thing. While his grave site remains shrouded in mystery, the Judeo-Christian accounts mostly imply that his body is nowhere to be found on earth today, while the Muslim tradition says that it remains buried somewhere within a stone's throw from the Promised Land. But even with this in mind, it is fair to say that the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic accounts of Moses have a lot of things in common. The only differences are mostly in emphasis and the events leading up to Moses's burial. So from a purely historical standpoint, the most probable location for Moses's tomb is Mount Nebo. So, what do you think? Is the tomb of Moses truly on Mount Nebo, or has it been taken away as the scriptures imply? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.